5 Americans are back home after spending years in prison. The Biden administration is taking fire over the deal to free them. It included a payment of $6 billion to Iran.
Well, critics charge that the money amounts to the biggest ransom in history, and they warn that the regime will use it to fund terrorism. CBN White House correspondent Abigail Robertson reports.
The U.S. Department of State says the 5 freed prisoners, some of whom have been held captive for years, are survivors of unspeakable cruelty after serving time for fabricated crimes. The freed Americans arrived in the U.S. early Tuesday morning, 3 of them in prison more than 5 years on convictions of espionage. The other 2 U.S. citizens wish to remain private. In exchange, the U.S. granted clemency to 5 Iranians held in the U.S., but critics argue it was hardly an even trade, since Secretary of State Antony Blinken also agreed to unfreeze $6 billion in Iranian funds.
An even swap of at least the same number of citizens is something that can be tolerable. But when you have to sweeten it with $1.2 billion per American to get them out, I mean, where's our $6 billion? But it makes no sense, and it does become the biggest ransom in history.
Victoria Coates from the Heritage Foundation believes the deal is a threat to the U.S. and its allies.
If he thinks that this isn't going to free up $6 billion, that now that regime does not have to spend on things like food and medicine, to spend on their nuclear program, on their terrorist proxies, on their missile program to strike Israel and even the United States, of course that's what they're going to do with it. That's what they did with the cash they got from the original nuclear deal under President Obama.
Republicans charge that the deal amounts to a ransom payment and warn it will encourage future hostage-taking.
The latest example of President Biden rewarding and incentivizing Tehran's bad behavior.
Democrat Mark Warner, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, questioned on CBS how the funds will be used.
I want to hear what kind of constraints are being put on in this exchange in terms of what has been reported of the $6 billion.
Blinken says the funds, Iranian oil revenue once frozen in South Korea, are now in a bank in Qatar and can only be used for humanitarian purposes.
We have absolute oversight of how they're used, and they can only be used for humanitarian purposes. And we have absolute confidence in the process and the system.
While the Biden administration insists they will approve each transaction, Iran's president says the country will use the $6 billion however it wants to. Tensions are still high between the two nations, the U.S. already boosting its military presence in the Middle East to counter Iran's harassment of shipping tankers in the region. Both presidents are at the UN this week, but have no plans to meet. Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, please pray for the people of Iran. They're living under horrific conditions. They're trying to protest against the current government, the religious police that are beating people to death. They're trying to do that, and all they're getting in return is being profiled, cameras taking their pictures and then finding out who they are. Then they're being arrested, and then they're being killed. And this is just part of what this country is doing, the leadership of this country is doing. And they're exporting terror in unbelievable ways. What have they done here? They've arrested 5 Americans. They did it on trumped-up charges. These weren't real. These weren't real spies. This wasn't real espionage. They were taken through mock trials. They were put in prison in order to gain leverage over the United States to release 5 Iranian nationals who had been caught doing very bad things here in America. That's the untold story here. So are we encouraging them to do this again and again and again? If you're an American citizen, I would encourage you, don't go to this country because you have no idea what could possibly happen.